The air was heavy with heat the day she found him. The woman had gone into the scrubland, searching for firewood, her basket balanced against her hip, when she heard a sound that froze her where she stood. It was not the bleat of a goat or the cry of a child, but something raw and broken, a high-pitched wail carried across the thorn trees. She followed it, heart racing, until the bushes parted to reveal the source. A lion cub. He was no more than a few weeks old, his fur golden but dulled with dust, his body thin, ribs pushing against his skin. His eyes, large, amber and wet with tears, blinked up at her in fear and desperation. He cried again, a trembling sound that cut through her chest. The land was full of dangers, hyenas, jackals, vultures already circling. Alone, the cub would not last the night. Her first instinct was to step back. A lion was not a goat or a dog. His kind grew into kings of the savanna, predators whose roars shook the earth. To touch him was to invite danger, perhaps even curse. But when he stumbled forward, pawing weakly at her skirt, her body moved before her mind could protest. She bent down, lifted him into her arms, and felt his tiny body trembling against her chest. He clung to her with surprising strength, burying his face against her shoulder as though she were his mother. The woman whispered softly, words she did not expect him to understand, but whose tone carried calm. She carried him back toward the village, feeling the weight of more than just his body in her arms. She carried a secret, a risk, and perhaps a miracle. When she arrived, the villagers gathered, their eyes wide. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "A lion," some whispered in awe. Others frowned, fearful. "It will bring trouble. His kind do not belong among us." The elders debated, voices sharp with warning. But the woman refused to lay him down. She saw not a predator but a child, an orphan who had found her as if by destiny. In her hut, she made him a bed of woven blankets. She fed him warm milk from a clay bowl, wiped his eyes, stroked his tiny ears. He purred soft and deep, curling against her lap as though he had always belonged there. Her own children, hesitant at first, giggled when the cub batted at their toes with his clumsy paws. At night, he slept beside her, his breathing steady, his warmth a strange comfort. But the village was restless. Some warned that he would grow, and when he did, his teeth would remember their nature. Others whispered that he was a blessing sent by the spirits, that the woman had been chosen for something greater. The cub himself seemed unaware of the storm he had stirred. He grew quickly, bounding after chickens, chasing shadows, always returning to the woman's side. And then, one fateful evening, he did something that silenced every doubt, every whisper of fear or blessing. A pack of hyenas prowled at the edge of the village, their laughter carrying into the huts, their eyes glinting with hunger. The villagers cowered, clutching their children, for the dogs they kept were too few and too weak to face such numbers. Before anyone could act, the cub, still young, still learning, stepped forward. His body trembled, his mane no more than soft fuzz, yet his roar tore through the night with a force that stunned even the elders. It was not the roar of a full-grown lion, but it was enough. The hyenas faltered, snarled uncertainly, then slunk back into the darkness. The villagers stared in silence. The woman gathered him into her arms once more, her eyes shining with both pride and awe. He had not just found her, he had chosen her. And from that night onward, the village no longer called him a curse. They called him a guardian. From that night, the cub was no longer a secret tucked away in the woman's hut. He became part of the village's breath and rhythm, his paw prints pressed into the earth alongside the feet of children and goats. Where she walked, he followed, padding silently, his eyes always fixed on her, as though she were the sun that lit his path. He grew with a speed that startled everyone. In mere months, the cub who once fit into her arms now stood tall at her side, his shoulders brushing against her waist. His mane began to sprout in tufts, his roar deepened, and the power in his stride was undeniable. Yet with every inch of strength gained, his gentleness toward her never faltered. She could stroke his muzzle, clean his ears, and even tug playfully at his tail, and he would lean into her touch like a child craving affection. The villagers watched with a mix of awe and unease. Some had grown used to him, even fond, seeing him roll in the dust with children or curl protectively at the doorway of the woman's hut. Others never let their fear ease, whispering that the day would come when instinct would turn him against them. But whenever danger brushed close to their lives, doubt shrank into silence. One dry season afternoon, a leopard slunk near the goat pens, drawn by hunger. The herders shouted, waving sticks, but it would not leave. The lion, no longer a fragile cub but not yet a full-grown king, stepped forward. His mane bristled, his chest heaved, and his roar rolled like thunder across the fields. The leopard fled in terror, vanishing into the scrub. The goats bleated wildly, but the villagers cheered, calling the lion by a new name, Moyo Wakijiji, the heart of the village. The woman listened, pride swelling within her, but she knew the truth. He was not just theirs. He was his own, born of the wild, tempered by her care. She feared the day when the horizon would call to him, when the bond they shared would be tested against the pull of blood and instinct. But for now, he chose her. Always her. At night, he lay stretched across the threshold of her hut, a silent guardian against prowlers, thieves, and hyenas. The firelight painted his coat in golden shadow, his breathing deep and steady, a sound that comforted the village as much as the woman herself. Children slept easier knowing he was near. Women fetched water without fear, for he often trailed beside them to the river, scattering threats with a mere flick of his tail. In time, he became more than a protector. He became a symbol. When quarrels arose, elders would gesture toward him and say, "Even the lion has chosen peace with us." His presence shaped how the village saw themselves, not as fragile prey, but as a community bound by trust and courage. Yet beneath the wonder lingered an unspoken question: what would happen when he reached his full strength? Could love truly hold a lion when the savanna called to his blood? That question waited, patient and heavy, like a storm building on the horizon. Seasons turned, and the cub was no more. In his place walked a lion, whose mane now crowned his head in golden flame, whose paws left deep prints in the earth, whose roar rolled across the plains with the force of a storm. He was magnificent, undeniable, a king in flesh and stride. The villagers could not ignore it. Each day, his shadow stretched larger over their lives. When he padded through the goat pens, the animals scattered in fear, even though he never touched them. Children no longer tugged at his ears or climbed onto his back. Now they watched from doorways, their laughter hushed by awe. The men, once comforted by his presence, felt unease stir in their bellies. A lion, after all, was not meant to walk among huts, yet still he chose her, the woman, his savior, his mother in all but blood. In her presence, his might softened into gentleness. She could lay her hand on his mane, brush dust from his eyes, even scold him when his play grew too rough. To her, he bent his head. For her, he lay at the doorway as he had when he was small. But whispers thickened in the village. "He is too strong now," some said. "One day his hunger will claim what his heart has forgotten." The elders debated fiercely. Some wanted him driven away before it was too late. Others argued he was a blessing, a shield against dangers greater than themselves. The storm broke one evening when a band of raiders crept upon the village. They came armed with spears, eyes hungry not for goats, but for power. The villagers scattered in terror. Yet before the first spear could fall, the lion thundered from the shadows. His roar shook the raiders' courage, his charge shattered their resolve. They fled into the scrub, leaving only the echo of his fury behind. The village erupted in cheers, voices crying his name, praising him as guardian, savior, gift of the spirits. But behind the cheers, unease remained. They had seen his power unleashed. If such strength could drive away armed men, could it not also crush them? Should his heart turn? That night the woman sat beside him, stroking his mane as he rested his massive head on her lap. She whispered words meant only for his ears. "You are mine, and I am yours. But one day the world will ask you to choose who you are." He purred softly, closing his eyes. To her, he was still the cub who had once buried his face against her shoulder. But the village knew the truth as well as she did. He was not just a guardian, he was a lion, and lions belonged to the wild. The lion's presence had become a double-edged blessing. By day, he was a shield, his roar enough to scatter jackals and hyenas before they ever reached the fences. By night, he was a promise, lying stretched across the village gates like a sentinel of muscle and fire. But blessings cast long shadows, and soon those shadows deepened. Travelers passing through the region carried tales of a lion living among people, a beast tamed by a woman's touch. Curiosity spread, and with it came danger. Hunters arrived, armed with steel traps and rifles, whispering of profit to be made from his golden pelt. From the legend itself, the villagers began to feel the weight of unease. They loved him, revered him, but they also feared the attention he drew, feared the line he walked between guardian and threat. The tension erupted on a day thick with heat, when cattle herds stirred nervously in the fields. A rival pride of lions, driven by hunger, prowled near the village. Their roars trembled through the earth, and the villagers froze, clutching their children. For a moment the lion stood at the heart of the village, torn. He looked to the woman, her hand steady on his mane, and then he stepped forward to meet the intruders. The clash was thunder and fury. Dust billowed, claws tore through flesh, roars rolled like earthquakes. The villagers watched in awe and terror as their lion fought against his own kind, driving them back blow for blow. When the last of the rivals fled, limping into the horizon, he stood bloodied but unbroken, his chest heaving, his mane matted with sweat and crimson. The people cheered, voices rising like a storm of gratitude. But when silence returned, fear lingered in their eyes. If he could drive away lions, what could he do to them, should his loyalty falter? That night the elders gathered in secret. "He is no longer a cub, no longer even a guardian," they said. "He is a king among beasts, and kings cannot live in cages, even if those cages are made of love." The woman fought against their whispers. She knew his heart, knew the devotion that had bound him to her since the day he pressed his frail body against her chest. Yet she too felt the truth settle heavy on her shoulders. Each day he grew stronger. Each day the wild pulled harder. The lion, though, seemed to sense none of this conflict. He still returned to her side each evening, still purred as she stroked his mane, still pressed his head into her lap as if he were the same cub she had carried home from the thorn scrub. But in his eyes, when he gazed past the huts toward the endless horizon, she saw it, the call of the savanna, rising louder with every passing season. And in her heart, she began to fear that their story was reaching the edge of choice, theirs or his. The rains had come and gone, leaving the land jeweled with green, and with them the lion reached his full glory. His mane flowed like fire around his shoulders, his roar carried for miles, and when he walked, the ground seemed to bow beneath him. He was no longer just the woman's cub, no longer just the village's guardian. He was a force of nature, and all who saw him felt it. But with that majesty came restlessness. He spent more nights pacing the edges of the village, eyes fixed on the horizon where other lions roamed. Sometimes their distant calls drifted across the plains, and he would answer, his voice blending with theirs, deep and resonant. The villagers heard it with unease. The woman heard it with sorrow. One evening, as the sun bled red into the savanna, she sat with him by the acacia tree. His head rested in her lap, just as it had when he was small, but his body stretched massive beside her, muscles rippling with power. She stroked his mane, her fingers trembling. "You have given us everything," she whispered. "Protection, love, hope. But you are not mine to keep. You belong to the wild." He blinked slowly, as if he understood. He licked her hand once, rough tongue rasping over her skin, then lifted his head to gaze toward the horizon. A roar trembled in his chest, not of anger, but of farewell. The next dawn, he rose before the village stirred. The woman followed him to the edge of the fields, her steps heavy, her heart torn. He paused there, turning back to her one last time. Their eyes met, hers full of tears, his full of something wordless but true. Gratitude, devotion, love. Then he turned and strode into the grass, his golden body swallowed by the endless plains. The village wept, but they did not curse. They lit fires in his honor, told their children of the cub who had once cried in the thorn scrub, who had chosen a woman over death, who had stood as their protector. He was not lost to them. He had become legend. And sometimes in the quiet hours of dawn, when the mist lay heavy on the earth, a roar rolled across the horizon, so close it made the huts tremble. The villagers lifted their heads, smiling through their tears. The woman would stand at her doorway, her hand pressed to her chest, whispering his name. For though he walked with lions now, the bond remained. A lion of the savanna, yes, but also forever her cub, her guardian, her child of the wild.